I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Hey, it's Srini. So one of the things that makes it possible for us to make this show is by selling sponsorships to advertisers. And one thing that would be really helpful in terms of helping us get more sponsors that are relevant to you and useful to you is that if you tell us a little bit about who you are. And you can do that by filling out this quick survey at unmistakablecreative.com/podsurvey. The questions are about you, demographic information, and information that's helpful to the team that sells ads for the show. And if you're someone who wants to buy ads, you should definitely get in touch. It'll only take a few minutes, and it's an easy way for you to help the show. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/podsurvey, and there will also be a link in descriptions of most recent episodes if you're listening to an older episode. Thanks, and stay tuned for the rest of the episode. I decided to start this segment of the show because I outlet to actually share what it is that I've been learning from podcast guests, which I've primarily done through writing up until now, which is how some of you might know me. But I, as you've probably heard me say, I'm an average writer who writes a lot. So occasionally I write something worth reading. I think that is probably why I put most of my energy into the podcast, although ironically, I don't listen to podcasts. Anyways, this is going to be different than the interview format that we've done. I think it's going to be called the Thursday Creativity Happy Hour, or the Unmistakable Creative Hour. Yeah, the Unmistakable Creativity Hour is what I'm going to be calling this thing. So what are we going to talk about? If you've been listening to Kel Newport's Deep Questions podcast, probably stuff similar to that. I'll, probably bring in some clips from interviews and things that I've learned, and I'll probably cover a topic every week. And so the topic that we're going to cover this week is creative confidence. And it's interesting that people are, in a lot of ways, terrified to get their work out into the world because they're so afraid of how it will be judged. And I think you learn the more that you do this work, or any kind of it, is pretty much inevitable that somebody's going to love what you do and somebody's going to absolutely fucking hate it. And somehow you have to learn how to make your peace with that, because if you don't, then other people are effectively dictating what your decisions are. Not only that, often it's other people who will not live with the consequences of any of the choices or decisions you're making. So hopefully that first insight unlocks some confidence for some of you. I've seen so many people that I've talked to who are far more talented than I will ever be, who I think are stashing away novels in desk drawers, paintings that they've never shared with anybody, or other ideas that just sound absolutely insane to them when they think of them, so they don't follow through on them. And so you look at some of the bizarre ideas that have had not only been incredibly rewarding to the people who created them, but wildly successful and totally weird. Some of them are like things that just people came up with on a whim. So if you might remember, we had this guy. What the hell is that guy's name? The guy who runs PostSecret, Frank. Go back and do this, and whatever Frank's name is. So PostSecret was this random idea where this guy decides that, you know what, I'm just going to hand out 3,000 self-addressed stamped cards and ask people to share an anonymous secret. That's strange. There's nobody that would think that would lead anywhere. And yet that project has helped millions of people because the guy just acted on some really bizarre whim. So that is often one of the things that happens when we give into our creative confidence, regardless of how bizarre, weird something sounds. Some people said that podcasts were dead in 2009 when I started, and that turned out not to be true. So I think that the thing that you have to come to terms with is the fact that you're also probably going to be wrong sometimes. That has to also be part of the equation. If you think about one of Seth Godin's most frequently referred statements is, this might not work. Well, that's true for just about everything in life. It's not just for creative work. Everything you do might actually not work. And if you're not cool, that's going to be problematic. So one of the things I want to talk about is I really want this to be about listeners, and I'm trying to share advice just because it's a first solo show and nobody's ever heard me do a solo show before. I actually want to hear from you and answer your questions, and I'd love to even have live call in if you're interested and talk to you guys about what's going on with you. What are your challenges, and however I can help. You've probably heard me say the joke I always say is that if you want to rob a bank, run for president, become a porn star, or do something along those lines, I can probably introduce you to the people who could help you make that happen if you're new here. Although those would be very strange goals. No judgment on my part. Those people were brilliant, so be sure to go check out our episodes with them. In fact, talk about creative confidence. A guy who robs 30 banks basically becomes a talking head on the criminal justice system because he feels that he has something incredibly important to say. One thing that I have seen, I would say, with my guests when it comes to this issue of getting your work out in the world or being afraid, the weirder they are, or the weirder the thing they do, the more interesting they are. So don't discount things that sound silly or weird just because they don't necessarily seem to have any end in mind. I think that's one thing that actually also really hurts a lot of people, is they're incredibly attached to outcomes. And that's one of those things that I think is completely out of your control, regardless of how good or bad you are at what you do. If you look at the top of the New York Times bestseller list, go look at the book reviews of some of guests. Hell, go look at some of my book reviews. I think there's one woman who said that she hoped I was a better surfer than I am a writer. I can tell you for a fact that I am a far better writer than I am a surfer. So that should tell you how average I am at surfing. But that's the thing. If you look, every one of them is extremes. So in fact, the thing is that if you don't have work that polarizes to some degree, not polarizes in a way that divides and makes people angry, but that either people love or people hate, then you probably haven't done something of substance. And that's one of those things that honestly frees you up when you realize, okay, let's just assume that 80% of people are going to hate whatever this thing I did is, and maybe 20% will love it, and I build from there. And that's another thing we have lost sight of, is that in this process, you're better off going deep with a handful of people in the beginning when you're trying to build anything than you are trying to reach some sort of massive audience, because that's setting yourself up for failure right off the bat. That's the other thing. I think that part of what kills a lot of people's motivation to do things is expectation. And I can tell you, this is something that I've wrestled with. You go and you start something, you think it's going to be bigger, better, whatever it is. But the problem with that is that the more energy you put into that, the more energy you're taking away from the very things that make those things happen, which is actually doing the work. But somehow we worry about a lot of things that we can't control. And I think that when you stop worrying or focusing on anything that you can't control and shift your focus to the things you do, that actually gives you an immense amount of power and freedom that you just don't get when you're completely focused on outcomes, because then you're doing something every day, whatever it is, building a skill, whatever it might be. And you also start to build momentum from doing something small. And it doesn't even have to be that big. But when you have that kind of momentum, what ends up happening is you start to feel confident because you start to see the progress. There's this concept called the progress principle that is based on a book by a woman named Teresa Mabili, where if you just visually track something, whatever it is, the number of days you sit down and open a journal, or the number of days you did a push-up in a row, the seeing your progress, marking just X's on the wall, is actually incredibly motivating, it turns out. And funny enough, on the other side of that is Sean Acor said that your brain makes progress towards a goal based on the distance to that goal. So if you've got the combination of visible progress, that goal starts to seem a lot closer. So something to think about that really has helped me a lot. And, I've been thinking about how you stand out in the world that we're living in today. And I think a lot about what the future of sort of media creation is going to look like. And I'd love to hear some of what you think. Some of the things that I've been playing with, I think that the Oculus is a very cool thing, something that probably we will do sometime this year. I'll do my first interview in virtual reality. If you have an Oculus, please let me know, because I would love to actually host a group of people who have an Oculus. I think that'd be super fun, because I haven't really got to interact with anybody inside of it that I know of in any depth. So it'd be really cool to potentially meet some of you if you have an Oculus. So hit me up. You can reach me at Srini at Unmistakable Media. But yeah, so the other reason I wanted to do this, you might have heard our mid-rolls for it already. So one of the things I realized that also is a big issue for many people, maybe yourself, is that people feel like they don't have a lot of time. And so there's this issue where you buy a course or whatever it is, maybe you've had this experience where whatever you're doing, you can spend $80 to $100 even, or even up to $500 or $600, and then you never look at the thing. But a lot of people do that. I'm sure I've done that with one or two things. And so I wanted to actually dissect why that happens. And so I want to dissect why that happens. And the truth is that it really comes down to time commitments and how we spend time. But time is this incredibly precious resource. And there's this illusion that we can actually save it or optimize it or whatever. But the truth is the only thing we can do is spend it. And so paradoxically, the less time something takes to do, the more likely you are to do it. And so I thought, why do these long ass 12-week courses with DIY modules when we can pack in everything into 3 days and 3 hours that you actually need from a online class? And you probably heard Wes Cow last week talk about this, where live cohort-based learning is totally different than getting together in person. Or live cohort-based learning is completely different than consuming pre-recorded modules, because what you're having happen is the difference between active engagement and passive. Now, active engagement is truly how we learn almost everything that we actually learn. And you think about it, just go back, through your life. How much have you learned just staring at a screen or somebody just lecturing at you? Probably almost everything valuable you learned came from interacting with other people. And so we thought, if we did this in a way that was actually manageable for people, not these huge commitments where it's basically 3 days, 1 hour each, and we teach a live workshop. And once you're done with the course, you're done. So basically, we decided to do the first one as a sprint for how to build creative confidence, which is why I've been talking about all this stuff. We wanted to talk about overcoming imposter syndrome, building sort of skill level that makes you feel like, okay, you know what, I can share this thing regardless of how somebody reacts, dealing with critics, all that kind of crap that gets in our way. And basically 3 days, 1 hour each, you'll be in a group with a bunch of other people. We'll do breakouts. I will answer any questions you have. And yeah, I would love to meet some of you. We would love to have you be a part of this. So anyways, this is my first take at this. Hopefully it'll get better. Hopefully you found this useful. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think of it. I will probably do a little bit more of a job of producing it, bringing in clips and other stuff from previous episodes. So let's see how it goes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.
MeUndies knows relationships aren't perfect. That's why they're celebrating imperfectly perfect matches with their new Valentine's Day collection. Right now, new customers get 25% off matching pairs. Match your bottom half to your better half in fun, limited edition prints. Check out all of MeUndies' sustainably soft undies, socks, bralettes, loungewear, and more, available in sizes extra small to 4XL. Get 25% off your first order of matching pairs, plus free shipping, at MeUndies.com/VDay25.